Excellent. Okay, I'm going to be talking to you about seeding data in Ruby on Rails. It's one of those things where I'm sure we've all picked up projects where if there's no seeds, we all kind of know it's not going to be as good as maybe if there's something there. Like, and picking up a blank project is not the most fun experience compared to something where you can turn it on and you can be like, oh, I know what these features do now because there's something there for me to click around and like use, as opposed to like maybe having to turn on like terminal and creating a user and doing lots of manual legwork as soon as you set up a project. So what are we going to cover? So we're going to go through like kind of what you'd expect. I'm going to tell you what seeds are. I'm going to tell you some stories and give you some code, and we'll go from there. Hopefully by the end of this, you'll kind of feel like you just want to add some seeds to your project. It's like, yeah, there's some really easy ways to add them, and they don't have to be like really irritating and annoying. And yeah, and hopefully you'll go to any old project and just be like, I'm just going to add some for fun. So to start off, what are seeds? They are best described as a little bit of data we use to pre-populate our database just to let us know what's going on in there. So it could be a user we use to log in as, so an admin user where every developer has, I don't know, user at example.com with the same password, which is pretty common for me at least. I always use that. Or it could be like chunks of data we put into every environment within our app. So, for example, tax data or something like that, where we just want it in the database everywhere. And in Rails, Rails is like the only framework where I've really been like, oh, look, there's a thing where I can set this all up really nicely. They have a command called Railsdbcd, and you just run it, and you should be able to run it like multiple times, and it should just work most of the time. That's the aim. Whether you actually get that is debatable, but yeah, it just goes and calls the db/seeds file, and it will just run through that code, add all the stuff to your database, and that's great. I normally use bin setup for all my stuff right now, and I absolutely love it. I'm not sure if anyone's played with bin setup. It is like the funnest command in like Rails, where it's just everything you need to set up your app from like zero. Quite often, it's cool. So yeah, as I mentioned, they're stored in db seeds. Hopefully that's not a surprise to anyone, but just in case you want to find them, go have a look at that file. In most apps I picked up over the last couple of years, it will look like this. This is the default look. Like most people don't change it or do anything with it, and I hate this example with an absolute passion. There's so many things I dislike about it. Like mostly like there's nothing checking if that thing exists or not, which I really dislike. And there's no like environmental difference stuff. It's just like, hey, you might want Star Wars movies, and I'm like, not in my app, I don't, because I'm a Trekkie. Yeah, so yeah, if you're lucky, you will end up with something like this, where someone's kind of gone ahead and they've been like very nice and given you a default user. Which, yeah, honestly, if I see something like this, I'm normally like a little bit happier, and I can. It just means I can just run my command, go in, log in as my standard like user. I go in and jump around the app and have a bit of fun. This is something I took from a project a couple months ago. I found it in their seeds file, and everyone just kind of gave me a database, and I was like, "But there's seeds. There's something in there. I can see there's something in there." And they're like, "Don't run it." Turns out the production database, none of this worked when I ran it. I ran it locally. It's very different from production, and it made me very wary of seeds. Like you kind of have to check the Git blame to see when they were last updated. Sometimes, but yeah, if you see something like this saying don't use in production, just delete the file. It's not worth keeping it in there. Cool. So I want to check the vibe. Throw up your emojis on the chat. All reactions or make some noise. Who has worked in a project where there is absolutely no seeds at all? Who's had that experience? Yeah. Who had that? Let me just scroll the chat. Okay, cool. Yeah, we've all had that experience. I hate that feeling where you just download a project and there's just nothing. Who has worked on a project where someone has just emailed them a database dump or just sent one via like Slack? Like I feel like that happens more often than we want to admit. And yeah, it's fine. I don't like hate that because it's quite nice just to get a copy of something. But yeah, it happens quite a lot. I have a story around this, by the way. I'm going to tell you where that completely shot me in the foot. Okay, who's worked on a project where they felt the seeds were really well maintained and really, really good? Okay, cool. That's what I expected. No one's not quite as much noise. Cool. Dan, Samuel, that's you lucky person. You really lucky person. Unless your hand is up. Unless you've raised your hand. Do you have a question, Dan? I'm pretty happy to do Q&A, by the way, if you want to.
Hey, no, I didn't have a question. I thought that was how you kind of did the emoji thing, but
oh yeah, that's fine. Not. That's all good. Yeah, that was cool. I'm going to encourage everyone to do that actually, because that got my attention very quickly as opposed to me scrolling through. All right, cool. But anyway, you lucky person for having worked on a project with good scenes. That's very rare. I think that's like the golden goose of a project. Okay, so I'm going to tell you some horror stories now because I like telling stories around my talks as to why I'm telling them almost. So I had a friend, they worked for an agency, and their process was they would download a copy of the production database, run it on their local machines, they'd be sitting in their offices. And it was a few years ago, but they'd be working away. One day they came back from the weekend and they realized their office, the door just had gone. Someone had just come in and stolen all the Macs. And they were like, oh no, this is terrible. We've just like got to do so much paperwork. Then they also realized they had a copy of all these production databases just sitting on their machines, and under like the law, they had to go tell the customers that they just had a big data leak, which was really embarrassing, and no one really wants to have to tell a customer that, hey, someone physically walked in and just walked off with your data. That's terrible. There's a couple of ways we can mitigate against this. I've heard that Facebook just kind of makes people SSH into a cloud machine and work there. And if you're seeing GitHub code spaces, I'm really excited about them because it's a very similar experience where your local development machine just lives somewhere else. And like if someone was to steal your computer, they're not going to get any like sensitive data. So that could be quite exciting. But yeah, just something, if people start sending you like data, just remember to delete it every once in a while. Cool. So this is my most like the day I was quite a young developer when this happened, and it was the most stressful week I've ever had. We had this preview environment which could send emails. Originally we had Mailtrap running on it, so all the emails would be captured, and there was a cron job running in this preview environment, so just to make it match production. And then we had an anonymized set of data from production which got like put into this thing, and no one would ever update it. It was always a few months behind. And one day we also just had the customer say, oh, I want to see these emails in my inbox as opposed to Mailtrap. So it started sending real emails. And then one day someone decided it'd be a good idea to pull down production down to this staging environment. And then about 24 hours later, we just were like, why is there so much traffic going to staging? What's going on? Turned out it had emailed every customer to say, hey, you have new notifications. Something has happened. And because we hadn't anonymized any of the emails or changed any of the passwords, all these people were able to get in with their production data. And it was like so many whoopsies. And I kind of like look back on it, like it's been a few years now, but I look back on it and I'm like, well, if we had like good seed data from the get-go, the customer would have never asked us to be doing all these things which led up to that tragic mistake, and really made me a really stressed out little junior dev. So yeah, that's kind of my story there. Maybe try seeds if you can before you start doing stuff like that. And then lastly, I've kind of mentioned it a few times. I really like good developer experiences. Like I want people when they come to my projects or any Rails projects just to be like, yeah, this is really good. This is everything's there. I don't have to think about this. This is a lovely, lovely, beautiful experience, and I think it does a really good service to Rails to have like people just to do bundle exec Rails S after cloning stuff, and just to be like, oh, there is the app I'm working on. It makes sense. The other kind of little advantage of having like a good seed like setup is potentially you could be seeding hundreds of records, and then things like n+1 queries will become really painfully obvious during your development process, depending on how you develop, which I think is quite important. So this kind of little low-hanging fruit could be there. So now I've kind of hopefully told you I really want you to use seeding in your applications. I'm going to give you some techniques where you can just get it going and have a good old time. And hopefully make it nice and painless. So here's the techniques I'm going to go through. Hopefully, I won't spend too long on each of them, but hopefully you'll enjoy them. So the first one, it's just putting something in that seeds file. Like it doesn't have to be a beautiful work of art. It just has to be something. If you want to like kind of go a little bit all out, I've seen people just break that seeds file into multiple subfolders, which are just loaded alphabetically, and that I think is really good. That's like you just add your data in, and then someone can run it, and it'll just hopefully work, and that's great. We like that. And if you're using a tool like Faker, there's this like idea called like fuzz testing where you kind of just put in random data to your app just to see what would happen. I've been using Faker in a lot of my seeds lately, kind of like this. So I just will never be looking at the same thing each time, and the amount of times it will find like a little bit of HTML if not coded very well, because actually that field can accept like way more, and I never like did that in my seeds because I normally roll my face across the keyboard when I'm like putting in like data to look at, which I think most of us maybe do. So yeah, seeding some nice fake data. It's not going to be like lots of swear words and stuff like I normally would do. So that's a good thing to do. After I kind of played around with those approaches there, I kind of wanted to see if there's any easier ways. Because I really like to, if I'm going to write a piece of code once, I want to use it everywhere and get the most bang per buck. And I found out that in Rails, you can actually load your fixtures into your main app. And I tried it and it kind of worked. It wasn't like a great experience. It wasn't like the, oh, wow, this is wonderful. It was more this like, oh, this is doing stuff kind of approach. And then it kind of had trouble with its foreign keys a little bit, which was quite interesting. That was quite cool. And then I realized I actually prefer factories. Factories are way better. I've never worked on a project with good fixtures, and all my factories generally look a bit like this, where they kind of can set up all their mates, all their associated data quite nicely. And that kind of got me thinking about, well, what if I use my factories for my seeds? Is this like an option? Does it work? So I went through and wrote this kind of code where I was like, right, I'm going to lock them to a specific email address. That's going to be the one I go in with. I'm going to maybe set the password there as well. And every time I would just pull down something, I would just reset everything and have like a fresh kind of randomish like data set to look at, which was similar to my test, but not there. And this was really good. This blew my mind. This I was really enjoying it really fast because I didn't have to worry about like any like I didn't have to worry about too much. I was getting this really nice advantage of I'd be writing a like an integration test and I'll just be able to kind of go to that page and see what possibly the data would look like, which was quite fun. And because I was using my factories and not just my tests, I was able to just I just felt so incentivized to actually make them good and like complete like things which look like all my data. So that was cool. Yeah, highly recommend this approach. I really liked it. That was quite cool. One quick warning though, like Thoughtbot doesn't recommend you do this. They wrote an article about 7 years ago where they're like, we're not so sure about if it's a good approach. I think I disagree with them now because I've just had so much fun just kind of constantly resetting my environment when I'm just like done for the day and just having everything cleared. So we'll see. But obviously there are times when you're probably like you want to debug something's gone wrong in production, you want to grab that data. So how can you do that? Well, Evil Martians has a really really cool gem called Evil Seed, and it's kind of just a little script you run and you say go to the database, go fetch like this user and get all of its associations. And what's really cool about this is you can just pull down like maybe 10 kilobytes worth of data. It's partially anonymized and you can use it on your local machine, and that's really cool. There's something quite nice about just getting just the data you need to debug a problem and nothing more, and then you're very aware it's just a small data set, so you're kind of happy to destroy it afterwards. I've been kind of wondering about whether this could be like semi-automated, where like if you have a user who like files a ticket, you could just kind of quickly take a dump of their data and have it available with the ticket to debug issues or something like that. But yeah, have a look at this. This is if you have to actually pull down data from production, don't get like all 10 gigs of the database, just get like the one line which is relevant, and that could be quite fun. Finally, Who's worked on a project where there's maybe a table where it has like 4 rows in it, that's it, and it's only 4 rows, and they haven't changed for like 10 years because of whatever, and maybe you're always using them like this. That will feel quite familiar to people. We've all kind of seen something like this, where you've got like a little belongs to, and yeah, maybe a user has like a plan, those plans are never changing. So I was working on a project where they had something like this everywhere, like so many things were just like in the database and they just didn't need to be there. So the approach I played around with was pulling out that model from the database and just chucking it into a strut. So the idea is that all of that logic is now the same across all environments. I don't have to touch the database to get it. It's just sitting there in the code. And then I can just use it kind of like this. So I just go and look up that strut's reference to whatever plan they're on here, which is, it's not like the cleanest code or the nicest code. I think it could be way prettier. And I'm sure there's a slightly better approach, but I just really like the idea of like, if there's something where actually it needs to be there every time, just pull it out of the database. It doesn't need to be there. Like databases for data you maybe don't want to have or doesn't need to be consistent across all environments. It's like stuff your users are going to roll their face across the keyboard and make, which is quite cool. Uh, Testing seeds. We're almost done, I promise. So tests are they're great, but I feel like as part of like the development process, if you can make them part of your test suite, you suddenly will just be like super aware when they break. And I'm sure like with most projects, most people pull it down like maybe once in a while and then run the setup stuff, and that's when you find out everything is broken and poor junior is going to be like having a horrible day. So if we could chuck our seeds into like a test like this where we're just calling the load seed command in Rails, and then maybe we use some envs to say what's actually going to happen, because controlling what's going to be seeded with envs is a nice approach. That's quite nice. It doesn't have to be a fancy test as well. It can just be like, I just want to make sure you run without error and you save the stuff to the database. I feel that's more than enough, and you get a lot of bang per buck for that. Also, if you're going to take that factory bot approach I mentioned earlier, if you're linting all your bots, they pop up really quickly with this approach. And when you lint the bots, and then it tries to save them, and then if it can't save the factory and all of its traits, it will just kind of warn you with a very nice warning. This has been really cool for me. Like, I really love it when like this one test runs and it's like, oh hey, actually you've screwed up like 5 things with your validations, and it took like half a second to figure that out. Like, really cool. So what is the best way to kind of handle your seeds? So I think like you should be able to constantly be able to run your seeds. The aim should be to have very destroyable local environments. Like, you shouldn't be attached to the data in there. It should be like you start the day, pull down your colleague's work, and just start up a fresh environment each time. And that could be quite nice if we start moving to like cloud environments like code spaces on GitHub, which could be fun. If you're using them in a preview environment like Heroku previews, where it's gonna, for each pull request, it's gonna just create a little environment for people to see that code. If you're using your seeds in that, that's really cool, because you're getting like a lot of bang per buck there for like people. You're getting a lot of bang per buck if you like flush them out quite well and have like really good seeds, because then you're a bit more incentivized to make them look right. And again, plain old Ruby objects, factory bot, all that stuff, really good. And again, if you do have to touch production data, just get in the habit of only taking down what you need and making sure if it is on your machine, it's anonymized a little bit. So mostly, if just in case your laptop gets stolen, it's just worthwhile thinking about that kind of stuff. So homework. I've got a little bit of homework for everyone. I want you to take a project over the next week and just try and make the seeds a little bit better, and just let me know how it goes. And if you try that factory bot approach and you like it, just tell me. Like, because I'm kind of like, I've been playing around with it and I like it, but like I'm just one developer, so I don't want to be like preaching it too much if it actually is like a horrific idea. Okay, that is me done. I'm Mike Crudges. You can find me on Twitter. That's Mike Crudges0. I'm normally pretty chatty on there. And yeah, that's me done. Has anyone got any questions or anything like that? Let me just stop sharing my screen. Let me find the thing. I have no idea how to stop sharing my screen.
That's it. You're stuck there now. You'll be sharing a screen for the end of days.
Wait, there it is. It was behind all the pictures of people. That's great layering from Zoom.
Thanks, Mike. That was really good. I
thank you.
was going to say that we maybe in the last 3 or 4 days also started doing the same factory bot pattern with generating seed data. And a colleague of mine built all of this code to try and recreate a bunch of test data that we could sort of keep. It's just a tool we use to mock another service. And he wrote all this code that essentially emulated factory bot. He wrote the thing that generates the models and creates them, and then goes through and finds the associations and makes all those, and then he like made a bunch of test things. And I said, well, why don't we just replace it with the factory bot? And it's been working great. So we've only done it in a small place, but I really like it. I think it's certainly has a place outside of tests, even though I know Thoughtbot were like, but I still think there's some value there.
I think that's just Thoughtbot not willing to like take the bull by the horns and be just like use it everywhere.
Well, I mean, probably because they've got quite a few articles, right? Like I refer to a lot of their stuff because they've been around a while. They probably have a reasonable standing in terms of making suggestions, and that's probably why they've been hesitant, because they're like, we're not sure if this is a good pattern, but you know, go nuts. Advisor discretion. But I really like it anyway. But yeah, that's good. Thank you.